old people, when they get to a certain age, they begin to reflect back on their lives, and they would constantly tell me things like, Raymond, the older I get, the more this whole thing, when I look back on it, seems like a movie or a play or something. And that's as close as I can get to this, because I do think that it's really kind of unnecessary to think of us unloading our consciousness into a virtual computer, because I think we're in there already. I really do.
Welcome to The Portal. My name's David Lovegrove. Today I'm talking to Dr. Raymond Moody. Well, at least he's talking to me. I've sent him 3 questions relating to my book, The Portal, and Dr. Moody has given me some terrific answers, very thought-provoking answers. I've got another interview coming where I had a long chat with him, which I think you'll find very interesting. For those who don't know Dr. Raymond Moody, he was the seminal researcher into near-death experiences back in the 60s and 70s. And he published a book in 1975 called Life After Life, which caused quite a sensation. He has since gone on to continue to study the subject and broaden it out into subjects like shared death experiences, which are really quite remarkable, and think deeply and research deeply into all areas of consciousness. He's always been a philosopher, fascinated by ancient Greek philosophers and philosophy generally, and he's taught me a lot as I've got to know him. In conjunction with his friend Lisa Smartt, who's also a friend of mine, they've set up lifeafterlife.com, which is a website devoted to the study of near-death experiences. And you should check that out. It's a fantastic resource, and it's recently undergone a major refurbish as well. Lots more there for you to see. In the list below, I'll note down ways you can contact Dr. Moody, where you can find his books, and a little bit more about him. So we'll move on now to the questions and answers, and I hope you really enjoy it. And please give me some feedback in the comments below what you think. I'm always interested to hear what your ideas are. And please subscribe if you haven't already, and please tell your friends.
All right, David, how are you? And so great to talk with you. And I got your 3 questions here.
Dr. Moody, do you think that my concept of a virtual portal, seeming to be situated in the rear brain, the visual mind, is a valid way to conceive of how humans connect with the other side, to manifest NDEs, SDEs, inspired works of art of all kinds, and God-given visions, messages, and powers?
Virtual portal. Absolutely. I've had that same kind of thought about a passageway. And at the same time, it's I think of it as metaphorical at best. I mean, in the sense that, as you know, I'm sure you do too. And this is going to sound quite psychotic, David, but things of brains and such, I just have no opinion about brains. I'm not even sure that they exist. And I know that sounds so strange, but I was having a conversation with my friend Eben Alexander a few years ago, and I was saying, I said, Eben, I think that consciousness generates the brain, not the brain generating consciousness. And he was in agreement. And to me, in a sense, I think that the whole physical world is conventional. It's a backstory. Um, because to hold all these life narratives together, there needs to be some sort of backstory that most of us agree on, and one of them is that there's brains, and I just don't know whether there are brains or not. Um, and I know that sounds psychotic, but even when I was a little kid, I realized that consciousness I can attest to. I'm sure there's consciousness, but the external physical world, I have never been able to make up my mind for sure that there is one. It's all we mean by the physical world is that we notice that there are recurrent patterns in our consciousness. And there's all sorts of ways to think about the why the patterns occur than to making the leap that there's an external physical world. When I read Bishop Berkeley in 1964 as a philosophy student, I just said right on, because that's how I always thought anyway. I mean, it's but in terms of the portal aspect, yes. In terms of the brain, I don't know. I don't know. But there is a portal, and I think it's something like what the people with near-death experiences say about the tube or the tunnel, a passageway into some other realm, and that it doesn't really seem to be describable. So yes, I think it's plausible to call it a portal, and the whole idea of transition between one dimension to the next is very interesting to me, and I agree with you that it's very similar to creativity. I think that art and art definitely comes from somewhere else. That's what artists tell me all the time. And I experience it myself in my own writing. You just open up I just switch something off, and all this stuff comes through from elsewhere. And it comes not necessarily in the order where it's going to appear on the page. You know, a sentence will come that's ends up on page 93, and then the next sentence that comes ends up on page 3, and then just by the most amazing process at the end, all of these things fit in exactly. It's just amazing.
Dr. Moody, have you experienced supernormal powers? For example, ESP, telepathy, clairvoyance, telekinesis, etc., either yourself or in your patients or in subjects you have studied?
Have I experienced supernormal powers? Question number 2. Well, I guess again the terminology ESP, telepathy, and clairvoyance and such. I mean, those are technical terms in a way, but definitely in terms of the experiences I've had, and just the most amazing things have happened to me in my life, and one of them that comes to my mind, because I was just seeing my little Native American daughter to my right here, was back in 1981 or 82. It was the springtime. I was sitting out on my back porch in my porch swing in Charlottesville, Virginia. And at that time, I had 2 wonderful sons. And they are now grown. Carter, Avery is almost 50, and Samuel is 47 now. And then we have the 2 younger ones. Carter is 22, and Carol Ann is 20. And so, but in the spring of 81 or 82, I was sitting in that porch swing, and I'd always wanted a daughter. And at that era, you didn't know what was coming, right? You just, one day you went to the hospital and the doctor said, it's a boy or it's a girl. And I loved my sons, and, was very happy with them. And I'd always wanted a daughter, but My wife had had difficulty with her last pregnancy, so we knew it wasn't wise to um, contemplate another pregnancy. So, in this, I was sitting there on that porch and I entertained a daydream, but it was a very, very heartfelt and deep daydream. And I don't know where it came from. It was just suddenly appeared in my mind. It was kind of like a wish or what a wonderful thing I thought it would be to adopt a Native American daughter. And I really dwelt on it that night, but I never put any effort into it. That was the spring of 1981 or 82. And I never put any effort to it. Then, flash forward 19 years later, um, my wife and I were had at that time adopted Carter, who was then about 2 years old, who was our son we had adopted. And out of nowhere, this Native American woman, a Blackfeet woman, that I had met several years before in New Mexico. And the way I'd met her was I was at a conference at which I was lecturing, but I was sitting in the audience waiting for the previous lecturer to finish his lecture. And so I was sitting, my wife was on my left, and sitting next to us was this obviously Native American woman. And the speaker at the podium asked for questions. And it was one of these places where they had a microphone in the middle aisle. And people who wanted to ask a question of the speaker would come up and line up at the microphone and would stay in line and get to ask their question. Well, I don't know, you might not know many Native Americans, but that is not the Native American way to do it. I mean, they don't make eye contact because they think that's impolite and so on. And so we just noticed that this Native American woman sitting next to me on my right obviously wanted to ask a question, but her body language was such that, she could tell she's so conflicted. She just couldn't, that's not the Native American way to put yourself out in public like that. So my wife tapped me on the elbow and motioned to this woman. And so I just, as anybody would, just took her by the arm and led her around and stood with her there at the microphone while she asked her question. And we learned that this wonderful lady was Christine, was her name. And so that was our interaction. It was probably about 1996 that happened. Or 96, 95 or 96. Now, flash forward those 5 years later, and the phone rang one day, and it was Christine. And I remember she's such a wonderful, cheerful voice. She said, "Oh, how are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, we're doing great. We adopted a baby." And she said, "Oh, I wish so much I had known you were looking." Because, she said, she works in the hospital on the reservation. And she said, "I am the very first person in the hospital to learn when we have a situation where we need an adoptive parent." So I said, "Well, by all means." And that's how my daughter, Carol Ann, came. And I said, "Well, please look I just always wanted a daughter." And so just very shortly thereafter, Christine called and said, "Well, your daughter is on her way." And we were there. We went and we got to know we had to go through the tribal council to, because for some reason the Native Americans don't like the idea of Caucasians adopting their kids. That's just a joke, for reasons that are obvious. So we went before the Blackfeet judge and, arranged. And so That's how I got my Native American daughter. And so these things, yes, the world is full of magic. It's just so many magical things happening all the time. And then when my daughter was about 9 years old, from the very beginning, she loved walking because that's her the Native American Blackfeet women. They were the gatherers. So it was a hunter-gatherer society, and so for 20,000 years, the role of the women was to go and gather in the woods. And so I've always liked to take long walks, and we lived in a rural area. So immediately Carol Ann just started going on these long walks with me. And when she was 9 years old, we stopped at this old wooden bridge about a mile from where we live. And she'd like to sit on that bridge and talk. And this particular day, out of nowhere, she said, "I don't like this world, or I don't like this place." And it was obvious what she meant was this world. And I was kind of shocked, and she said, "Yeah." She said, "Yeah, when you die, you just go up and you be with God, and He keeps you up there till everybody you know while you're alive has died, and then He sends you back as another person." And I should say, in context, to build context around that, my wife and I don't talk about life after death. We talk about what's for dinner, the phone, how to pay the phone bill, and we don't take these kids to religious things. And they found out about my work, life after life, by looking me up on the internet. So my point is, this is not anything she got from us. But so she said, and so, about you just when you die, you go up and you be with God, and He keeps you up there till all the people you know while you're alive have died. And then He sends you back as another person, she said. And I said, "Well, what makes you think that?" And just like this, she said, "I just know in my mind." And she said, "And I was with God, and He pointed you out to me." And He said, so I was there, I was with God, and He pointed you out to me. And He said, "You got to go down to be His daughter." And I said, "Well, how did you feel about that?" And she said, "Oh, I didn't want to do it. I wanted to stay with my Gotti." But she said, "But He pushed me," twice like this. She said, "But He pushed me down to be your daughter." And so I said, "Well, how did you feel about that?" And she said, "Oh, I didn't want to do it. I wanted to stay with my Gotti, but He pushed me," she said. And because I didn't inquire, if you ask questions, you run the risk of shaping the story something. But I just listened. But still, she remembers that, and once in a while, she brings it up herself about it. She said, I've always wondered why they pushed me out of that light." So, and there are just so many other things like that. Yeah, that life is full of really completely magical things.
Dr. Moody, may I ask your opinion of the direction science and futurists are leading us regarding melding with artificial intelligence, the possible downloading of our consciousness into quantum computers, and living in virtual worlds? And what could be the possible effects of such human-machine interventions on our relationship with natural death, God, and the divine realm to which NDEs indicate we are naturally bound?
And something, my take on that, David, is that I'm not so sure we don't live in a virtual world already. That's the closest I can come to my thoughts about this, is that I think this thing we're in is kind of like a theater. It's like a holographic theater that God takes us through these different movies. And my own kids have convinced me that when you get out of this one, you go through a sort of incomprehensible process, and then you're back on another storyline. So I think that, we're living in that virtual world anyway. I mean, it's like God is the projector. I don't know if you have in Australia the so-called creationists who insist that, that God made the world in 7 days and so on. And I call myself a new creationist. I think that God is creating everything all the time. I mean, that's my considered opinion, and I think that this is like a sort of theater, for want of a better term. When I was a geriatric psychiatrist for a year, I heard that all the time had a lot of very articulate older patients who were mostly there, most of them just because, some situational stress or loneliness or whatever, and just wanted somebody to talk to. And I heard that recurrently, that old people, when they get to a certain age, they begin to reflect back on their lives, and they would constantly tell me things like, Raymond, the older I get, the more this whole thing, when I look back on it, seems like a movie or a play or something. And that's as close as I can get to this, because I do think that it's really kind of unnecessary to think of us unloading our consciousness into a virtual computer, because I think we're in there already. I really do. It's you may remember that when you were a kid, if you missed an episode of your favorite TV show, there was kind of like a grieving process, right? Because you thought, well, maybe it'll be resuscitated in the summer season, but if not, you just missed it. But now you can go to your computer and you can tap a series of numbers and you can watch any episode of any of those shows. So I think that we're already living in a virtual world. I really do think. I think consciousness is what it's all about, and that matter, including the brain, in my opinion, is kind of an illusory backstory. It's so that everybody can have the same set of coordinates to keep all these stories together, but it doesn't require an external physical world. At your age, you might find it very interesting to read Bishop Berkeley, George Berkeley, on the principles of human knowledge. It was a big, wonderful book to me when I read it in 1964, but mainly because that's what I thought anyway. But it is has the most ingenious way of reasoning it out that's ever been done, where he sort of shows that the whole idea of matter is just an illusion. As quantum physicists, aren't they telling us that anyway? Now it's all apparently it's by observing it, you cause the collapse of the wave function. There's an object there, but it's like Einstein was so shocked at his quantum theorist friend. He said, "You mean to tell me that you think that the moon doesn't exist if I'm not looking at it?" But that's what I've always thought. That some people, I guess, are just temperamentally sort of put consciousness first. But that's how I've always thought about it. But anyway, what a great thing to get to know you, David. And so it's just been great talking with you. I'm sorry we got cut off the other night by the machine. So good luck to you on your book, too.